I want to review a passage that I didn't get 100% on and just be 100% transparent and realistic and see where I went wrong, and hopefully this helps somebody that maybe is taking the MCAT and doesn't know how to approach some of these bio passages. So let's start. Don't mind my hair. My hair up. So just keep in mind that this is technically a spoiler of the AAMC full length. So like I said, this is full length 4, but I just thought that it was really important to see how I approach these questions, because maybe it makes a difference in how somebody else does these questions. First thing I'm gonna do is just read the passage. Like I said, I didn't get a lot of these questions right, so whatever the marked answer is might not be correct, so don't guide yourself based on what I put. So I'm just gonna read passage 7. So it says, CCK is a peptide hormone that was first isolated from the small intestine, where its release is stimulated by the presence of food. So I just highlight key words that will help me find any information that I'm gonna need later. So I highlighted CCK because that's the hormone we're talking about. It's a peptide hormone because peptide hormones and steroid hormones, they act pretty differently when they actually enter the blood. And the fact that it came from the small intestine and then its release is caused by food. So I'm gonna start kind of a flow chart, and I'm gonna do this pretty quickly, so sorry if I'm talking fast. I just hate when people do passage breakdowns and they're taking their sweet time, because realistically, we don't have a lot of time to dissect these passages and really understand what's happening in them. So I want to keep this as transparent as possible and as quick as possible so that we can solve and answer these questions in a timely manner without taking 20 minutes to explain a passage, because that's just not realistic and that's not how much time we have. So once secreted by the small intestine, CCK facilitates digestion by releasing into the duodenum bile from the gallbladder. Why are they talking like Yoda? The MCAT loves to make shit more complicated than it actually is. So I'm going to kind of use the flowchart method. If you guys haven't watched IFD, their channel is amazing and they talk about the flowchart method a lot. Long story short, it's just flowcharting. So it's just making a simplified map of what the passage is saying. So first thing I want to talk about is the fact that it's secreted by the small intestine. CCK facilitates digestion by releasing into the duodenum bile from the gallbladder. So basically it's going to act on the gallbladder. And this is honestly a pretty high yield concept. So if you are not familiar with CCK, you should have an understanding. Not to read the passage, because in this case they're letting you know, but I've definitely had CCK and secretin, which are both hormones, come up a lot while I'm studying for the MCAT. So when you're reading this first paragraph, you should already be thinking, okay, I know that CCK causes constriction of the gallbladder to release bile into the duodenum. So that's something that I'm writing because the passage is telling me, but that is something that you should have in your mind. And if you don't have that yet, it's okay. The passage is telling you, and now you know, so don't freak out. So CCK from the small intestine is acting on the gallbladder, and it causes constriction, because I know that, so I'm gonna put little lines on there, to secrete bile, and it's gonna send it to the duodenum. CCK facilitates digestion by releasing into the duodenum bile from the gallbladder and pancreatic juices. So, rich in enzymes. So, and pancreatic. I'm going to put pancreatic enzymes. CCK is also known to trigger satiety centers within the brain upon ingestion of food. So, satiety, I know, means that you're full, but it also tells you in the same sentence. So it says, induces a sensation indicating that enough food has been eaten. So I'm going to put more CCK means you're going to feel more full. The pathway whereby CCK activates brain satiety centers appear to involve CCK stimulation of vagal afferent fibers, because more activation of VA fibers, which provide a negative feedback signal to the brain that leads to feeding inhibition. So a negative feedback to brain, which tells you stop eating. Activation of this pathway is sought to account for the significant reduction in the size and duration of meals. So I'm going to highlight that. That is observed in a variety of species, including humans, in response to exogenous CCK administration. So exogenous CCK administration, I'm assuming means like the injection of CCK into the bloodstream because it is a peptide hormone. That means that it can essentially go straight into the bloodstream, but it can be any sort of external administration of CCK. It just means that your body isn't the one producing it. So it's saying activation of this negative feedback. So the fact that CCK activates your brain's feeling of being full or satiety means that you want to eat less. And so activation of that pathway that makes you feel super full is thought to account for how much less you eat and how much less time you eat for. And that's in response to some kind of new CCK, so like giving CCK in some way. Scientists have hypothesized that abnormalities in CCK secretion may occur in patients with bulimia. So I'm going to highlight bulimia because that's what we're talking about. Bulimic individuals consume abnormally large amount of food in one sitting and then later purge the food from their bodies, usually by vomiting. So I'm going to put purge the food to test this hypothesis. CCK responses to a meal were assessed in non-bulimic and bulimic subjects. Figure 1 shows the mean response, and then the bars are error. So now we know. I'm going to read the caption of the figure, but I'm not going to actually interpret the figure unless there's a question that is directing me toward interpreting the figure. So CCK levels after a meal, which is in non-bulimic subjects, which are the control group, and bulimic subjects. So I'm going to see how much CCK is changing in the blood, depending if it's a control group or the people that have bulimia nervosa. The information in the passage best supports the hypothesis that which of the following defects, accounts for excessive eating by people who have bulimia. If you didn't know, you can highlight parts of the question as well. And I find that this is really useful to actually pinpoint what they're asking you. And something that I like to do is reword the question in a simpler way. So basically, the question is asking, what part of the passage tells you why people with bulimia eat a lot? Okay, so let's start with A, fewer CCK sensitive vagal afferent nerves. But here we see in my flowchart that more CCK means you have more fullness feelings because you have more vagal afferent nerves or more activation of the afferent nerves. So I don't think it has to do with the actual amount because this says fewer CCK sensitive afferent nerves, but it's talking about the activation of those nerves, not the amount. So I'm going to strike through A because I don't think that even has to do with CCK. Excess bile release in response to CCK. So the hypothesis that which of the following defects accounts for excessive eating. So if you have excessive bile released into your duodenum, is excessive bile going to cause excessive eating? So if you have a lot of bile, that's likely because you have a lot of CCK acting on your gallbladder that's going to cause more bile release, right? So if B is true and you have excessive bile, that means that you are probably feeling more full because you have more CCK. And that's not going to make sense if you're talking about excessive eating. If anything, you would be eating less. So I don't think B makes sense. C, decreased release of CCK in response to food. So if you have less CCK, that means you're going to be less full, according to my flowchart. And that would make sense because you're going to be eating more because you're going to be feeling less full. So C makes sense, but I'm not sure yet. Let's look at D, hypersensitivity to the presence of CCK. So if you're hypersensitive to CCK, it's basically going to exacerbate or kind of multiply the effects of CCK. So if CCK makes you feel more full, hypersensitivity probably means you're going to feel super full. And that's not going to cause excessive eating. So I think that the answer is C. And I am right. Let's go to the next one. Okay, like I said, don't mind what I put because it could be wrong. And yeah. Which of the following events does the release of CCK likely trigger? Okay, so I said before that something I knew from external knowledge is the fact that the gallbladder is constricted. So gallbladder is constricted by CCK or due to CCK. Okay, so the question, to reword it, says what happens because of CCK? And relaxation of the gallbladder is not one, because if you relax the gallbladder, that means that CCK isn't even working. So you don't want to relax the gallbladder. Now, this is the part that I messed up on. So a sphincter, or the hepatopancreatic sphincter, when you think of sphincter, what you should think about is a funnel. So when you have a sphincter, it's kind of like a funnel, right? To release something. So let's say you have a bunch of, I don't know, enzymes or something here. The funnel is going to allow those to go through. And this is the equivalence of a sphincter. Right? Is this exact? No, but this is the way that you should think about it to understand this better. So the gallbladder, we know, contracts, and it's going to so it's going to squeeze and release bile, squeeze and release bile. And this is because CCK is acting on it. But a sphincter works in a different manner. A sphincter relies on relaxation, because if you relax the sphincter, it's going to allow all of this to go through. But if you close a funnel through contraction or constriction, then nothing is going to go through. I mean, imagine a funnel where the ending is closed because it's constricted, then nothing is going to go through. But if you have an open funnel with a large hole at the end of it, then whatever enzymes or whatever you want to go through will go through. So the correct answer for this question would have been relaxation of the sphincter, but I stressed myself out and I second guessed myself and I got it wrong. So the correct answer is that a sphincter relaxes in order to secrete something. Okay, the next question is, which graph best illustrates the change in food consumption that would result from CCK treatments of rats? So I'm going to look at the axes here. So I see size of meal, control, and CCK treated. So when did we talk about size of meal? And then this is when highlighting is really important. So I remember I highlighted this. So the size of the meal and duration of meal. So basically, number 38 is asking what happens to food consumption when rats are exposed to CCK. Okay, so here, this has to do with this portion where it says activation of the pathway that makes you feel full reduces the size and duration of meals in response to exogenous CCK administration. So the rats that receive CCK administration are going to have less than the control. And that's just because that's straight from the passage. The passage is telling you that there's a reduction in size and duration of meals in a variety of species. So this is already hinting at the fact that this could apply to rats. And so the correct answer would show this being the trend. And the answer is C. Okay, the next question is, by stimulating secretion of peptidases from the pancreas into the duodenum, oops, what's going on? By stimulating the secretion of peptidases from the pancreas into the duodenum, CCK facilitates the digestion of. So this question is just asking, what do peptidases do? Do peptidases break down fats, protein, nucleotides, or carbohydrates? So peptidases, usually enzymatic names or the names of enzymes, are what they digest or what they break, and then ase endings. So like if you have a lipase, this is probably going to do with lipids, which are fats, and it's going to be the digestion of fats. So the following options contain a peptide bond, and the only viable option would be proteins, because proteins are made up of amino acids, and then when you link a bunch of amino acids together, it's going to form a protein. This is the primary structure of a protein, and these little lines represent peptide bonds. So this is just asking what digests what. So for this one, you would just have to know kind of enzymatic naming and the structure of a protein. When you really sit down and review a lot of these passages, for the most part, of course there are some passages that make absolutely no sense, but there are going to be some passages that are way simpler than they felt the first time that you read them. Hopefully I was able to simplify this in a way that makes sense to you, but now you can understand whether maybe there's content gaps that are making you struggle. Maybe you're having a hard time flow charting or trying to write down your thought process. What would happen to me a lot of the time is that I would be reading, but nothing, lights on, no one's home. I wasn't really digesting anything that I was reading. And so I found that flow charting was actually more helpful than I thought, because I was scared of running out of time by making these tables and writing all of this stuff down. But I realized that it was really saving me time in the long run, because I didn't have to reference the passage as much as I used to have to before. And that way I don't have to depend on the passage and rereading things over and over again. So if you depend less on the passage and more on what you wrote down, just make sure that what you wrote down is accurate, then I feel like it's going to be way easier for you to approach these questions in a way that helps you. So everyone learns differently. Maybe here you didn't know what CCK was and you can add an Anki card, or maybe you thought that this passage was super easy and a waste of time, and that's completely fine, because everyone knows different things and everyone knows material to different extents. So hopefully this helps at least one person. That's my personal goal. Yeah, that's everything I wanted to say. Bye.